Hello, friends. Welcome. I'm Ayasoma, and I'm here with Venerable Banda. And today we will try our best to answer your questions if you have any. And before we begin, we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham namam sangham namasami. All right, so welcome to some of the friends who are checking in. Hello to Kaus, our friend, that, if I remember correctly, you're in Europe, right? Now we're in the same continent. And hello to Amparo Hernandez and Maria Nova Scotia and Jayanta. Good to see you as well. All right.
All the people hiding. Looks like there's
yes, and there's more people that haven't checked in yet. We see you as a number, but we don't see you as a name. All right, so Kaus, our friend, has a question here. So in my samadhi practice, I notice intense feelings coming up. While pleasant, engaging with them quickly becomes too much and makes me want to abandon my meditation. What can I do here? Venerable Bhatta, do you have some preliminary thoughts?
Sure, thank you, Venerable. Well, let's see. So one of the things that comes up when you say this is, let me just quickly reread the part that's, you say while pleasant, engaging with them. Yeah, so when you say quickly, engaging with them quickly becomes too much, there's several things to maybe explore in your meditation. One thing that's important to remember is that the pleasure of meditation is a different type of pleasure from the specifically sensual pleasures. And it can actually be interesting to see how the mind can sort of expect the wrong type of thing. And you can both miss the pleasure in meditation, and you can also generate a wrong pleasure and focus on the wrong thing. So like especially pleasures that are related to like excitement or restlessness, often they're kind of coming from the wrong place. They're coming from the mind kind of trying to acquire an experience or get something. But the pleasure of meditation is a pleasure of settling. It's a pleasure of peace and stillness, and it's a pleasure of non-desire. So it's very counterintuitive. And I don't know how much you've practiced meditation, but it can be really weird to experience something that's totally different from like acquiring pleasure in an essential way. So like, for example, the pleasure of just not wanting anything and actually developing that rather than just, actually sort of pressing the letting go button, so to speak. It's a really different type of thing from getting an exciting experience. And so in the meditation, when some kind of pleasant thing comes up, if it's disturbing, then something is going wrong. So maybe the word is not wrong, because it's not good to have the attitude towards your mind when you're meditating. So maybe I shouldn't say that, because you shouldn't think something's going wrong per se, but it's more that something we can change our attitude towards it. So one of the quotes from Ajahn Chah is when the monks were experiencing a lot of noise, and they complained to Ajahn Chah and said, can you please talk to the villagers about the noise, because they're playing this really loud music and it's disturbing us, and we can't get any rest and we can't meditate and so on. And Ajahn Chah told the monks, well, it's not the sound or the noise that's disturbing you, it's you disturbing the noise. And it's actually the same with anything in the meditation. So for example, it's not the pleasure disturbing you, right? It's not that the pleasure is too much. You're disturbing it somehow. That's definitely happening. Otherwise, it wouldn't be disturbing, because nothing is disturbing except for our mind kind of going against it, not liking it, pushing it, especially if it's pleasant. So if it's something like pleasure, the restlessness, the agitation, the overwhelming feeling that you might be experiencing is the mind reacting to it, probably trying to control it, getting excited over it, or wanting it to be more, or something like that. Or it's the wrong type of pleasure. like it's just overwhelming because, again, it's something that's restless or exciting and it's just overwhelming the mind. So it can be a lot of things. It's really hard to know from a general question like this. But what comes to mind for me is I would look at like, how am I disturbing this? Not that it's overwhelming me, but how am I disturbing this? And then you'll start to see, oh, okay, I'm not actually settling. I'm not resting and becoming still and making peace with my experience and my life, with my moods and my emotions. I'm somehow wanting something, desiring something, getting excited, restless, getting disturbed, expecting, and that is actually stirring up the mind. So it's not the pleasure. And it's the same with the breath. Like some people say, oh, the breath is tight, the breath is tense. No, it's not. We're trying to control it. That's what makes it tense. You could say it is tense, but it's not because of the breath, it's because of the mind. And it's the same with other emotions and moods. So you can kind of look at that and say, like, how can I make peace with this? How can I see this experience, whatever it is, as a friend that's coming to visit me, or as a visitor that I'm hosting, and say, oh, welcome to my home. One of the experiences I had when I was recently in Australia was I was in a kuti in a little hut, and then in the yard there were things like kangaroos and birds that would come around. And if the animals come into the yard and then you say, what are you doing here? And you start looking and you kind of get excited, like, oh, look, there's kangaroos, or oh, look, there's birds. Then they get a little bit sort of tense and agitated, and then they will probably go away. But if the animals come into the yard and you're like, oh, yes, you can come into the yard, but I'm not going to watch you. You know, I'm not going to stare at you. You can come here. You're my friend. I trust you. I'm not going to control you. I'm not going to expect you to do something or to be closer, to be further away, or why are you eating that grass and not this grass or whatever. Then actually the kangaroos, they get very comfortable and they start kind of hanging around. They might even get very close, almost too close. And it's the same with the moods and the pleasures in the mind. If we start kind of getting tense about them and sort of saying, what are you doing? What, you know, how's it going to change and so on, then it will quickly get tense. And then everything kind of gets stuck because actually you're experiencing your own reactions reflected in your emotions and moods. It kind of comes back to you like that. And so in the same way, if you kind of see, okay, how can I make peace with this and kind of give it some space, kind of open up, kind of take my hands off the wheel a little bit, kind of sit back, be friendly, be kind in that way, and then just see what happens. And it should become more peaceful. Or you might notice that you're just focusing on the wrong thing. Like you're focusing in the wrong way. You're focusing on something that is making you agitated. And then you just kind of step back, and the same thing, it will help you kind of relax. So I hope that that's a little bit helpful. I don't know, Venerable, if you...
Great, thank you. I think that was pretty thorough. So hello to some other friends that are checking in. Hello to Aitumak, Venerable Sunyanandi. Hello, good to see a Venerable online. And Yankee Apple, Gregory Primosh, Hasanta, our good friend from Sydney, Uttara, Anna Maria, Ryan, and Lulu. Okay, wonderful. Okay, yes, perfect. So Anna Maria says, Venerable Vanda, I wasn't sure you still know how to speak English. Your Italian is inspiring. It's true, actually. Venerable Vanda speaks very good Italian these days. And so the question that Anna Maria is posing is it lack of generosity to refuse to lend money to a family member? Well, it depends what the actual money is for and also what our intentions are there. So, for example, if our family member is asking for money in order to buy drugs, well, maybe it's a good idea not to lend them money. Right? And if they're asking for money for something else that is wholesome, that is not against the principles of Dhamma, then we have the opportunity to look, investigate in our heart, and we will find the answer for ourselves, right? So we will, first and foremost, just practically, are we in a position that we have a little blip. So I don't know how far you have heard, but anyway, so I was saying, for example, us monastics, we don't handle money. We don't have money. Therefore, we just are not in, we don't have that ability, that capability of lending money to someone. So it's not out of lack of generosity. It's just out of lack of ability. And so this can also obviously be the case for certain lay people that maybe in a particular time and place, they just don't have something to offer. Now, if someone has something extra to offer to, so has that capability of sharing, then one really needs to understand the intention behind wanting to help someone else, share it with a family member or even an unrelated person, and basically seeing what is it that is preventing us from sharing whatever we have with that person. And when it's stinginess, we will see it because it really comes with a tightness of the heart. And so there, maybe we just need to actually practice a little bit, practice letting go, practice giving. Sometimes we will be very generous, perhaps with food and not with money. Or maybe we're very generous with money, but not with food, right? Each one of us has different conditions. Usually every person is generous to a certain extent with something that just one feels very, very comfortable with. And one can take this opportunity as really, once again, an opportunity to address one's own stinginess in a particular area and make little steps, right? So maybe we're like, okay, I feel comfortable giving $5, but not $10. Okay, then this time I'll do $6, right? And then next time I'll do 7, and then next time I'll do 8. It's no different than lifting weights. And so in this way, it's like a gradual practice to which then the mind can see with wisdom how comfortable, right, it is actually to give, and how uncomfortable it is instead to be stingy. Because when we really look at the body, that sense of stinginess, that not wanting to give, that wanting to hoard, really makes us uncomfortable, like physically and mentally uncomfortable. And instead, giving, letting go is always a source of happiness. And in this way, once we actually address it through kind of mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of emotions, rather than I should be doing mentally, like rationally, I should be doing this and I shouldn't be doing that, then we will actually know what is our intention towards our family member, what is our intention towards others. We will know, okay, actually this sharing, giving this money to this person right now is not useful. It's not needed. It's not something that I want to support, not out of stinginess, but out of some other sort of reasons that might be in accordance with Dhamma. Or we will know, actually, yes, well, I really don't want to give out of stinginess. And then we know that we need to practice a little bit more. No different if our relative asked us to lift 100 kilos. We're like, well, I'm not there yet. I can't lift 100 kilos, but maybe I can lift 3 kilos, 5 kilos, 10 kilos, 20 kilos, however much we can. All right. Do you have any other thoughts?
I think that's good. Maybe just what comes up to me to summarize what you kind of said in a way is that sometimes you give out of stinginess, and that's a reality. And I think sometimes there's also the other side that I assume was pointing to there is sometimes it's not we don't give because of lack of generosity, but there's some other thing we want to be generous with. Just as like, oh, I don't want to give you, I want to give you the gift of, for example, not having this problem. And we say, oh, in my heart, I don't want to give it because I want to give you a gift of peace or something. I want to protect you, right? So it's, the generosity is just a different type there. But then there is also the reality of stinginess. And I think that was, yeah.
Thank you, Venerable. And Venerable Sunyanandi says, what advice might you give to monastics in times of civil unrest? I'm returning to the States in March and thinking about how I can manifest Dhamma in these times. Venerable Ganda, do you have any thoughts?
I don't know. Let me see. Civil unrest. Okay. So something with the U.S. and how to navigate Dhamma. Well, just a disclosure that I basically have no idea what's going on in the U.S., so I definitely can't give any qualified advice about that. So what comes to mind about times of civil unrest? What would I do? One thing that comes to mind to me is that when there's chaos in the world, then we can always be a beacon of peace for others and for ourselves in our hearts, right? I think especially as a monastic, then I don't know to what extent this is true, but at least it seems to me that many people, when they are interacting with monastics, they're looking for something a little bit different from what they normally interact with, right? And I think if, for example, as monks, as monastics, we are giving people more messages of chaos, of unrest, of concern with the world, then in a way we're kind of not offering them a refuge that they might otherwise be looking for. And that's also not about just about others, but also about ourselves, of course, right? That as monastics, we are trying to find a refuge of peace that's not dependent on the world. And monasticism is kind of any tradition, really, including Buddhism, but really of any tradition. Monasticism is almost based on the idea that the world is chaotic and that these things happen, right? That's kind of why people become monastics in a way. It's almost ancient. If you look at the Christian monastics, why would they go off into the desert? Well, it's because people know that the city is chaos and the life in the world is chaotic, and that's true of ancient times and it's true of modern times. And so I think that in a way, as a monastic, as a renunciant, or just as a practicing Buddhist in general, where we're kind of embodying or trying to practice some of those qualities, then that idea of what the Buddha says of be an island unto yourself, right? Be your own refuge with no other refuge. Have the Dhamma as your refuge with no other refuge. That's what he tells his community before he passed away, for example. I think that idea, which is so ancient and goes back and spreads across the different traditions of monasticism and religious traditions in general, is something that we can kind of call upon and say, oh yeah, this is not unique. This is something that everyone who has ever become a monastic has basically thought about, unless they did it for some other reason, right? Some other non-monastic reason. They somehow got into the robes because of social pressure or something like that, which happens. But the actual monastic form itself, it's almost doesn't make any sense unless the world was chaotic, right? Otherwise, there's no point of leaving the world. And so I think we can feel a sense of solidarity, like, oh yeah, this is why monastics exist. It's because there is civil unrest and other related things. And so what does that mean? That means that people did this and they found inner peace and they somehow were able to spread that and give it to others. That's how I was able to become a monastic, because other people lived these same types of conditions, probably much worse. The Buddha mentions that he became a monastic when he reflected on the fact that war was all around him and that no land was unsettled, and that even the ones who had been settled as fixed territories, there was still conflict going on. And so even the Buddha himself became a monastic when he saw civil unrest all around him. And so I think kind of having that idea of, oh, well, this is the point of this life. And that means also if we have faith in the tradition and we joined it, then people have found that peace. And it is something that they found. And it's something that they've inspired others, because otherwise it would have just been the Buddha and then we wouldn't have been able to become monks. So the Buddha found it and then he inspired others, and then they found it and they inspired others, and then they found it and they inspired others. And so that peace is possible. And that peace only can be a gift when we find it and then we share it, right? So to me, I don't know if that's helpful. It's very general, but I think that idea of just remembering, oh yeah, peace is the opposite of war. And peace is also the quality that we are developing in our minds, right? Peace is the quality that we're kind of trying to become attuned to. Peace is, in a way, what sila is, right? Making peace is like not being violent, not being cruel, not stealing, not taking, not having excessive desires and aversions. That's peace, right? And then peace is also meditation, right? Letting the mind settle into peace. And also wisdom is about peace, because wisdom is not fighting with the world, right? Not having a sense of basically self, a sense of wanting to make things other than how they are, right? Accepting things as they are. So that's also a form of peace. So in the way, the whole Buddhist path is about that peace. And I think when we embody that and we remember it and we recollect it, even as an ideal and as something that we can kind of trust in, then we are also offering that safety to other people. And that's in itself something that we can maybe be inspired by, right? To think, oh, well, to the best of my ability, I'm also offering this peace to others, and that's helping the world because I'm in the world. So I'm building world peace. So I don't know if that's helpful, but
great. Thank you, Venerable. Actually, as you were speaking, I was thinking a great example of that is the Walk for Peace that is actually very popular these days. We're seeing, right, in the United States. Actually, this was not the first Walk for Peace, but it's definitely the most sort of popular walk for peace that Buddhist monks have done. And but you can see, why is it so popular, and why are there so many different people who are clearly not born Buddhist who are joining this walk, are going to meet the monastics, are on the streets really moved? It's not because the monastics are doing really, quote unquote, anything. They're just walking. But as Venerable Vada was saying, fundamentally to do a little summary, is they're practicing what they're preaching, right? So actually embodying peace fundamentally. And this is embodying the teachings of the Buddha. So whenever we're actually practicing them, it doesn't matter if we're on the streets or in the cave, wherever we are actually practicing for the benefit of all beings, precisely because it's the sign of the samana, something like that really gives hope that there is something alternative to what we see in samsara. And so when we think about it, in terms of such a difficulty, it's not actually a nonprofit that is doing social work, that is managing to get so many different people on the streets, really advocating for peace, but it is a couple of monks, right? That they're just walking and practicing and really embodying also ahimsa, right? Embodying like non-harming. So it is quite inspiring, I feel, for everyone, including ourselves. That's why, as Bhante said, we have taken this form to begin with. And Counselor Friend says, yes, in Europe, great. I love that there's so many friends from Europe. You all have to come actually to visit us here in Italy. Maybe this summer. The summer will be perfect time, because we will be spending the Vassa here, so you can stay in the town and come visit us. All right, and Amarcadia, good to see you as well. Amparo asks, how to best support monastics, especially young monastics, to be successful in their path? Well, you're technically the young monastic. I'm not young anymore. Time goes by. So how to best support monastics to be successful in their path? What do you think?
I think there's many ways, but I think because you're a layperson, I assume, right, asking this, then I think the best way to support monastics is to value monastics in the world and kind of let them be, right? Like if when lay people appreciate monastics practicing, it really helps. Whereas when lay people expect monastics to basically not do what the Buddha kind of asked us to do, it can create some difficulties. I don't think really maybe one thing is to say is don't worry, it's not so much on your shoulders, right? The young monastics, we kind of have to practice for ourselves. So even if the lay people are supporting the monastics, there's only so much you can do. Even the Buddha himself said that he can only show the way. So just imagine, right, what the limits of even a single person, like one of us, what can we really do to help someone else? It's very, very limited in a way. But I think that probably the best support is to be inspired and uplifting or encouraging to monastics to practice, right? So like, for example, if there's some kind of peaceful place in the world where monastics can be, then maybe not to start a karaoke bar next to it, for example, or not to expect the monks to do a lot of activities that aren't necessary, right? It's like, it's good for them to do that if they are inspired to, but if it's something that's kind of forced upon you because of the scenario, it can be harder to practice, right? So it's good when lay people have that respect of like, oh yes, we want monastics to be able to be peaceful. And I think that that's often the case from what I understand and from what I've been told, and from others who have experienced that. People are often inspired by monks who actually are quiet. I know one of Ajahn Chah's favorite stories was the story of how Venerable Sariputta became a monk, and how the way he became a monk was he saw one of the first of the Buddha's disciples, Venerable Assaji, walking very peacefully, and he was so inspired that he wanted to talk to him. And the way, from what I understand, Ajahn Chah liked this story because he didn't actually really give him very many teachings. He was just very peaceful. And when I asked Ajahn Brahm when I was in Australia, so that's why I keep mentioning Australia, because I was just recently there, so it's on my mind. I asked Ajahn Brahm, what is our duty to the lay people? Like as monastics, what is our duty to lay people? And he said, it's to inspire them. And even just being a monk, like just meditating, just being a monk, doing your duties, your monkly duties, right? Just doing a bit of study, doing your meditation, being peaceful, basically, that is what your duty is to inspire them. And one of the other monks there, he asked Ajahn Brahm, is it that sort of as a senior, something like you have the duty to do a lot of teaching? And Ajahn Brahm said, no, actually some monks like Anuruddha, he basically never taught lay people. So some people are inclined to that, right? There are monks in the world who do a lot of external activity, and that's really wonderful. But what's really important from the monastics is to inspire by our practice, right? Because actions speak much louder than words. And I think we could take that in the other direction, right? So what is the job of the lay people? Well, basically to let us be inspiring, right? So to let those conditions be there. And however that can happen, I suppose that would be the best way. Not sure if that's...
Yeah, if you don't live in a Buddhist country, feed monastics. Cooked food, that's a very great way to support monastics. Very simple. And Cows, our friend says, I'm currently sick with a fever. Is there a way of practice that is appropriate at a time like this? Oh, yes, there is. Well, first and foremost, actually, it's a great opportunity to really do the 5 daily recollections, one of which is that this body is of the nature to get sick. So when we're actually sick, we can really go, wow, yes, the Buddha is right, right? This is actually true. And we can investigate it rather than do it. Sometimes the daily recollections, the mind can start conceptualizing things and go like, oh yeah, sure, I'm of the nature to get ill, and I'm of the nature to die, and I'm of the nature to grow old, but we don't really actually reflect upon it. So when we are instead experiencing, in this particular case, illness, then we can actually start looking at that, like embracing it, understanding, right, the first noble truth, and also understanding the second noble truth, right? So also seeing how averse we are to this dukkha, averse to these bodily sensations. And this is actually a little bit connected to your previous question, right, that Venerable Vada addressed at length. But also this, the reason why, like, it's very difficult also to deal with strong emotions, strong feelings, fundamentally in meditation, is also because in our daily life, we tend to perhaps not put enough attention to it. And we tend to just jump to whatever is like really great and feels good, and we want more of that. And then we tend to stray away from whatever is uncomfortable. But instead, both clinging to the pleasant and running away essentially from the unpleasant fundamentally creates that inability of actually really understanding things the way they are. So when we have a fever also, it was actually one of my favorite meditations, I have to say, like last year or so, or 2 years ago, I can't remember. I was on Tudong, and I actually had a massive fever up to like 39.5. I didn't know, but I had to lay down at a certain point while we were walking. And then luckily, a lay friend was close by and gave us shelter. And so for 24 hours, actually, I just stayed in bed. I couldn't do anything because the fever was very, very high. But it was one of my favorite actually meditation sessions because of there were so many strong feelings, and therefore the mind was very drawn to these strong feelings. And so I started looking at it and seeing how like watching really the 3 characteristics of anicca, right, of the impermanence of all of these different bodily sensations, that in one moment they're of a particular flavor, a particular intensity, a particular shape and form, and then the second later they change radically. then the dukkha, obviously, the unsatisfactory nature of these bodily sensations, and anatta, the impersonality of it, right? Whether we want those sensations to be there or whether we want them to go away, well, they don't belong to us, so they are there. It's just the way it is. So it's only a problem if we make it into a problem. And if we actually, instead of making it into a problem, we embrace it, we see it, then there's a lot of wisdom through which we can grow. Okay, do you have any other thoughts on?
I think that's good. Yeah, good.
Okay.
And practice with their counselor friend.
And Hasanta says, have you heard about the walk for peace? How involved should monastics be in advocacy and public good versus self-improvement? I think we actually just mentioned the walk for peace. And in terms of monastics, how monastics should be involved or not, I feel once again, each monastic should somewhat see what type of qualities they need to develop. And sometimes there's different practices for different moments in people's lives, right? And so rather than saying every monastic has to practice in this way and should not be doing this way, of course, unless it's really against the precepts, right? So obviously no monastics should be torturing sentient beings or killing them or selling. Like there's a bunch of obviously main moral points that shouldn't be broken. But when it's not that clear cut, then I feel it's a good opportunity for each monastic to really investigate their heart. And there are some monastics, since the history of time and in every tradition, some monastics are a little bit more contemplative and some monastics are a little bit more engaged in the world. And it's actually quite good. We shouldn't be saying, the monastics should only be contemplative or monastics should only be involved in the world. Usually, obviously, if you ask contemplative monastics, they will say every monastic should be contemplative, and every person who is engaged in the world would say, like, no, the monastic should be engaged in the world. But rather, I feel there's a place for both. In the end, I mean, this path is all about cultivating wholesome qualities. So we can constantly ask ourselves, are wholesome qualities increasing or are they decreasing? And if they're increasing, then we know we're on the right track. And if they're decreasing, well, maybe we need to revisit a few things. And Kauser Friend asks, in body or breath meditation, there's a very clear locational anchor for attention. In metta, that seems not to be the case. Instead, the sensation appears to be everywhere. Without the central location, I find it harder to stabilize attention without distraction. What can I do to stabilize? Would you like to address this?
I can start.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things that you say is that in body or breath meditation, there's a very clear locational anchor for attention. I just want to maybe pick apart the question a little bit and kind of clarify. When you say location, obviously location, normally it means like a physical place, right? And then for metta, you say it seems to be kind of everywhere. So it's a bit, when you say everywhere in location, I guess the question that comes to mind immediately is, are you thinking physically? Because of course, if you're focusing on the body, for example, then usually you kind of have to focus on a physical spot in space. But actually focusing on the breath, you don't need to focus on a physical location. And that can be very important to know, actually. So I would just say that. But I don't know if you mean like the location is the breath, for example, the object, so to speak, is the breath, then sure. But one thing just to kind of be aware of, which will then relate to the metta meditation. If you find it easier to do breath meditation because of the precision of, well, maybe the word would be the grounding aspect of the breath, right? Like you're focusing on the breath and you find that very clear, very stable to rest with. That's really good. And I would learn from that experience and transfer it to metta. So this is something that I find really helpful with meditation, is you learn from experiences in life, and then you kind of compare that to your meditation and you see what exactly is going, if it's something is not seems to be working, what exactly is going wrong. So to tell a story from another monk very briefly, there's a story about Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Chah said when he was meditating at first, he noticed something. He was examining his mind and he noticed, oh, wow, when I meditate, I'm less peaceful than when I'm not meditating, which is sort of the opposite, right? You think, well, when you're meditating, you're supposed to become more peaceful. But he noticed like, oh, actually, when I meditate, I become less peaceful, which I think many of us will have that experience, right? Have any of us ever meditated? And it's, harder maybe than when we started meditating. And then he started to realize, he reflected and he realized, oh, it's because when I'm meditating, like when I'm not meditating, basically I'm relaxing, right? I'm just kind of not expecting. But then when I start meditating, I'm kind of forcing and trying to get something. And you just what I mean? So he noticed that attitude and then he just applied that to his meditation. So the reason I say that is that actually all the time you can do that. Like, so for example, if you notice, oh, when I'm on the breath, it seems to be going well, but then you do the metta and it's not, you kind of see like, well, what am I doing with the breath that my mind is able to rest, but I'm not doing with the metta, right? And I would recommend examining that in a feeling way, right? Not so much thinking per se, but feeling, like, what does it feel like to rest with the breathing? How does that feel? What's going on there, right? So there's something happening in the mind and the heart that is allowing you to be still, right? Basically, it also often comes down to trust, right? Like, why is the mind thinking? It's actually because it's not fully content. Thinking comes from not being fully content. Like when we're really just content, the mind just rests in the present moment. It's just totally experiencing it. And often then if the thinking is coming, for example, of thinking, it's because you can't really trust the silence. There's something so for example, the sense of self wants to be commenting because otherwise the sense of self starts to go away and it's a bit scary. So that's an example of how not trusting can lead to kind of agitation. So maybe the metta, you're not really it's kind of surrendering, giving into it, trusting it. Whereas the breath, you find it easier to trust in. So can you feel that feeling of trusting? What does it feel like to trust the breath and just say, I trust you. I'm going to give away the controls of my mind to you, breath. And then the breath kind of carries the meditation. But then the metta, you have a harder time. So can you feel that feeling of trust, of giving, of settling, saying, I'm going to give it to you. This is not my meditation. This is the breath meditation, right? And then can you apply that to the metta? That would be one way of looking at it. And then maybe just briefly, the other thing you can do is, for example, if you're very used to focusing on a physical thing, like when you, again, going back to the point of location, then focusing on a mental thing, that could also be a harder part. The same principle of trust that I mentioned applies, but mental emotions are harder to stay with. And I think it should be kind of obvious why, right? Like if you're focusing on the metta is emotional, it's a mental, I should say, it's not physical, right? Of course, it can have physical kind of secondary features, like when you are very happy, you might have a physical sensation in your body related to that. But happiness isn't a physical sensation, right? Happiness is a mental sensation. And in meditation, when you're focusing on metta, you eventually, at least, depending on how you're doing it, but eventually you need to be focusing just on the mental part, because that's what the actual meditation is. It's the mental emotion or state of kindness, of loving, of accepting. It could be that you're not used to it. And one way of potentially helping with that, other than just have patience and we know like, oh, it's not easy. Of course, if we're not used to that, then it's not going to be easy, especially if most of our life is very sensual. Like if we're used to physical objects, if we're used to focusing on physical things, like our sense restraint is not very strong, the mind is going to be very pulled out towards focusing on physical things. And then that's why meditation is often taught focusing on the body, because everyone can focus on their body. But to focus on the mental world is harder. It's more subtle. It requires practice. And practice basically in the sense of just patience and just being kind, just waiting, opening up, and eventually the mind will move there, right? So you can kind of look at the breath in this aspect that I mentioned briefly before about what if I wasn't focusing on the breath on a point in my body? What if I was focusing on the breathing, right? Because actually breathing is not a physical location, right? Breathing is just air flowing in. You might feel the breathing at your nose or at your stomach or at your chest. Actually, you can focus on the breathing sensation basically anywhere, right? If I breathe right now, I might even notice it like in the left side of my body. But often when people do breath meditation, they don't focus on that particular spot, right? It's not necessary. So when we focus on something, there's many aspects of it we could focus on. Like when I focus on the computer screen, there's many things going on in my attention, and we have to focus on certain things. So one of the aspects of the breath is the physical location where you're feeling it in the body, but you don't have to focus on that aspect. That's just one of the many, many aspects of the breath. The other aspect is, for example, just the air. Just air doesn't have a physical location. If you focus on that, then you're kind of transitioning your mind away from awareness of a physical body part, and you're transitioning it onto a more subtle experience. You might have already experienced that in breath meditation, and then you can kind of get a feeling of what does it feel like to not focus on something in a physical part of your body, right? If that's helpful, I don't know. But the other thing is just to know that you don't, if you find it really hard to do metta meditation, you don't have to do metta meditation in that way. You can also just develop the attitude of loving kindness in general and build it up, and then eventually it will become easier for you. And then maybe just one more thing. I know it's kind of a lot, but for me, this is a good topic. So one other thing is, I think it's best often in the meditation when we can let our mind just focus on the most beautiful, delightful, peaceful, grounding aspect. It doesn't matter what it is, because then you actually don't really need to think about it. Like if you're just sitting here and you think, it doesn't matter what I'm focusing on, just what's the most beautiful, peaceful aspect right here. And then your mind will settle on that, right? Because if it's beautiful and peaceful, you don't need to be like, okay, how do I focus on it? And that's totally irrelevant. So like if, let's say you go to your friend, you're like, oh, let's go watch the sunset, and you're going to watch the sunset, and you tell your friend like, okay, where should I be looking at the sun exactly? And which part of the cloud should I be focusing on? And you're not getting it. You haven't understood how to watch a sunset, right? That's not how you do it. So you watch a sunset by just letting go, just whatever's beautiful, your mind just gets absorbed into that. That's the point of watching a sunset. It's not about sort of doing an activity where you're kind of like making your mind look at the specifically the crimson to the left, right? That's not necessary. And it's the same with the mind. It's like, oh, it's just a beautiful moment right now. Like, can I just be in this beautiful moment and just let my mind be peaceful? That might be your breath. It might be your body. It might be metta. And kind of it usually just happens, whatever in the moment will come up. Like if you sort of say like, right now I need to focus on metta, but actually the breath is the peaceful part that your mind is inclining to, what's the problem? It's like, so you can think of meditation like jazz like that, right? So it's just like you're playing the piano and then your partner does a different chord on the saxophone, and all of a sudden you're freestyling and you're over there now. But it's like, well, you're playing along and you're having fun. That's the point of music. And the point of meditation is to become peaceful, beautiful. It's not to focus on something in particular. So I would just let your mind settle in the most beautiful, peaceful part. And that might be the metta, might be the breath. And over time, you'll naturally learn to settle in the metta if you want to.
Great. Thank you, Venerable. Very thorough answers on meditation today. And Gregory asks, when meditating with 4 foundations of mindfulness as a subject, how should one practice with the 3rd foundation of mind? Should one observe thoughts the whole meditation session? If not, what? Good luck with that. Watching the thoughts, that's like So actually, what I really like as a description of Chittanupassana is the simile that Bhante Sudaso uses. So to take it as the canvas of a painting. So that gives us a better idea. So we can think of the strokes, right, with the paintbrush as like being all sorts of different things that happen in the mind. And when we're talking about the quality of the mind, instead, the canvas that's more what we're trying to look at, to understand, to observe. And so you can think also of different paintings, right? On different materials, different canvases. So sometimes you'll have the actual painting, which is the sort of cloth canvas, but then sometimes it could be a painting that is done on wood. And so that's the sort of wood texture, or maybe it's done on glass and whatnot. So you can think of that as like all the different qualities, like the different types of minds, right? So like a mind of hatred, or a mind of metta, or like become familiar with what that texture is. And so when we're talking about satipatthana, we're talking about basically sati, which is, aside from it being translated as mindfulness, it also has that sense of memory. So memory of the Dhamma, right? So also when we are developing this contemplation of the mind, we ideally want to look at it, understand it, to the extent that then it will permeate our memory, and we will understand, we will remember that texture of the mind, so that when also in our daily life, when we are interacting with people, and then that texture of the mind will change, right? Maybe somebody says something that we don't particularly like, or maybe it's like a political statement that we find absolutely outrageous. And then that canvas, that really like rough, uncomfortable canvas will show up. Then we will recognize it. We will have that memory there. And we'll also see how impersonal it is, right? How we'll have developed also the three characteristics in relation to it. And so that way we will be dispassionate. We won't actually react upon it. And then further along the path, then maybe it won't even appear to begin with whenever we will be hearing different things that we don't particularly like and so forth. Okay, so these are a few thoughts on it. And since we're getting close to the end, let's see. Itilak says, there must be something going around. I caught it night shivers and night sweats. Okay, very good, very good. Hopefully you're going to get well soon. And Ryan says, if you could go back in time, what would you say to your 15-year-old selves from your current wisdom perspectives that could inspire you to check out the Dhamma earlier in life than later? I personally would just give myself like the address of a Buddhist monastery. I just didn't know that Buddhist monasteries existed, or like, yeah, that was more my issue. I actually was already contemplating the Dhamma. I was just looking for Dhamma in sort of literature books, like so they were all like, my favorite authors of when I was an adolescent, essentially, when I was 15 years old. I remember I would like highlight some of their quotes, and then in hindsight, basically they were all like little glimpses of Dhamma, but it was always unsatisfying because there was no like Noble Eightfold Path. So I was like, okay, so there was a bit of like first and second noble truth, but there was none of the third and fourth. So yeah, I just needed an address for a particular monastery.
That's a good answer. Yeah. I think I would copy that one from you. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So maybe one of you lay people can create a map of Buddhist monasteries and start distributing it.
It's all the high schools.
Yeah. And Aldo says, pleasure and pain are considered sankhara, something that we just build up in our mind, but that is not inherently present in the objects of sense. Venerable Banda?
I guess to answer, kind of briefly here, I would say they're sankhara in the sense that they are conditioned things, or that they're like, basically sankhara means all the aspects of a person, of experience that are impermanent and so on, right? So basically samsara, right? So they are sankhara in that sense, as in like anicca-vata sankhara, right? Where all the sankharas are impermanent. But the Buddha does distinguish vedana, so the feeling of pleasure and pain, from intention, because your intentions towards a feeling and the feeling itself are different things, so to speak, right? It's important to, I think, in this question to remember that nothing is really absolute in life in these ways. Like, it's not like, oh, there's this category of reality and this category of reality, and they're totally separate. And, we have to speak that way with language, right? We have to say, okay, there's the body and then there's the feelings and so on. But it's important to remember these things are all connected. So of course, yeah, we build up our feelings through our intentions in our mind, but they're not exactly the same thing, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to have different intentions towards the same feelings. Just as a basic example, right? You could be feeling happy and you could have different intentions towards that same feeling, right? So happiness and intention isn't the same, but intention does build up feeling. And the briefest way that the Buddha kind of explains that is through the principle of karma, right? So he says, for example, if you do actions that are based in greed, hatred, and delusion, basically you're conditioning future painful feelings, right? And if you do actions that are based in non-greed, like contentment, and non-aversion, like loving kindness, and non-delusion, like wisdom, then you're building up future feelings of pleasure, right? It's going to come back as some kind of pleasant feelings. So that's the main way that the Buddha kind of connects intentions with feelings, and that can be immediate, especially like on the mental level, right? And it can also take a long time, like lifetimes, that certain actions might correspond to different feelings. So there's a connection there, but they're not totally the same thing, if that's helpful.
Great, thank you. Good. Bunch of people, well, including Counselor Friend, want to come visit. Oh, Venerable Nisabo, good to see you. And Hasanta asks, I find all the different words for mind in Pali hard. Recently heard to take that Chitta is that which knows the Nama and Rupa. Your thoughts on that, please? Actually, you're great for this. He used to be a linguist.
Well, I think maybe, I guess, okay, because I don't want to take too much time on the question, I think one of the things to remember is that people can interpret words, like especially Pali words, in all kinds of creative ways that are not necessarily wrong. But if you want to understand how they're used in the suttas, it can be a bit harder, right? Because really, there's very few people who are very qualified to kind of know that in detail, and people often make mistakes, even very qualified people. So as far as I know, the connection between Chitta and Namarupa, the only place that comes up in the suttas kind of explicitly in terms of the words is in the one, I think, small sutta where the Buddha says that Namarupa is, that the Chitta is basically caused by Namarupa, and that when Namarupa ceases, the Chitta ceases, something like that. It's in the Satipatthana Samyutta. So I think that's the only place where you see Chitta and Namarupa kind of directly put together. But I think usually what that kind of is pointing to is really in the teachings on dependent origination and on the five aggregates, the Buddha connects the words vijnana, which is usually translated as consciousness, with Namarupa. So usually Namarupa is connected with consciousness, and there's historical reasons for that. But it doesn't really matter, because the thing is with Pali words about the mind is there's even a couple suttas where the Buddha says, oh yeah, that thing which people call chitta or mano or vijnana, that thing is impermanent. So it's almost like they're kind of synonyms. It's like we say in English, oh yeah, mind and awareness and consciousness and cognizance and heart. Like it's all kind of, there's some differences in the connotation, but just depending on who you're speaking to and the conversation, it can basically mean the same thing. It just kind of changes a little bit the situation, right? So it's very similar in Pali. So there's no hard and fast rule with these things. But you could say, sure. I mean, if you equate chitta with vijnana, as it's defined in like the aggregates and dependent origination, then yeah, there the Buddha says that it's connected to Namarupa. But it's a bit more complicated if you say it's what knows it. There's different relationships. The main one the Buddha highlights is that consciousness is basically what gets, when rebirth happens, consciousness and Namarupa come together. That's the main thing he highlights, is actually the rebirth part. But you could also say that, yeah, sure, consciousness is what knows Namarupa. Yeah, that's also true.
Great, thank you. And Brian asks, I'm not sure. I was trying to see if there was like a beginning to this, but I couldn't find another post, so I don't know. Anyway, we'll try our best with this one. Be able to not work unless we want to. Connected to this and knowing what you know now and seeing what you've seen now, how would you advise a 15-year-old teen on the use of AI, her education focus, and their future and of mankind in regards to these tech advances, please?
Sounds like Ryan has someone in mind.
Yes. I personally am not really a big fan of AI and not a big user either. So, and I don't really read the news on AI or the news in general that much. So I'm not very proficient exactly in what the current situation is. But briefly, I would say, to a certain extent, I mean, technology is just technology. So we live in this era where there is artificial intelligence and it's a tool, right? So we need to learn how we can use these tools in a way that doesn't obstruct, first and foremost, our spiritual practice. That's the most important thing, not our job, not our whatever qualifications and this and that, not the money, but rather our spiritual practice. And so I would say that maybe the first thing that we should do with 15-year-old people or 25-year-old people or 35, 45, 55, 5-year-old, whatever the age, is fundamentally give them and ourselves access to spiritual practice, to understand the value of spiritual practice, and to shape a life towards spiritual practice, so that that becomes the priority of one's life, not job, not like the assignment, not school, not this, not that, but rather all of these, whether it's school, whether it's a relationship, whether it's anything in the world, should be supportive towards spiritual practice. And in this big pot, then there's also technology. So there's books, there is like computers, there is artificial intelligence and whatnot. And so if also one has then therefore the instruments that are given through the teachings of the Buddha of understanding the mind, right? A little bit like when we were talking about generosity earlier. If one understands, knows how to look at the heart and mind, one understands, well, this using this particular tool, technology right now is not beneficial, or it's beneficial, or I can use it skillfully, or I'm using it unskillfully. And therefore also knows if they need to ask for help in order to remove it, or if they can actually use it independently. So I would more, that's more what comes to mind for myself. I don't know if you're younger, you remember better being 15.
Well, I think maybe just on that same point, I think that's a good point. Like there's a saying in English, something to the effect of, if you give a man a fish, then you feed him for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, then you feed him for life, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously we don't recommend teaching people to fish in Buddhism. But I think what Venerable Son was pointing to there is actually a really good point. Like, just because you tell a child, oh, you should use AI, or you should not use AI, actually the reality is that at a certain point they're going to investigate to their own choices, right? You can't really stop people from doing that, nor should we, because that's how wisdom grows, is by learning. So I think it's a really good point. Like, rather we should teach people, I think, how to investigate that properly, right? Like if someone doesn't really know how to investigate AI, for example, from the lens of their spiritual practice, then they might think, oh, it's wonderful, oh, it's horrible, but all for the wrong reasons, right? whatever the conclusion is, it's like, how do you come to that, right? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? So I think that's a really good point. Like teaching people how to discern, teaching children how to make choices is more important, because there's many choices that they'll have to face, and probably AI will, they'll make other choices about technology we don't even know the name of. So if you know how to do that, then you know how to, prepare for all the possible kind of scenarios.
Great, thank you, Venerable. And I too, Max says, I'm the opposite. I enjoy metta all day. Great. If I sit for meditation once a week, that's a lot. How can I get a sitting practice in my habits? To be quite frank, Kalyanamitta is the entire path. So spiritual friend is the entire path, because if we have a hard time doing things by ourselves, we need the support of others, right? It's actually like very advanced practice to be able, even as monastics, to be able not to live in a sangha, no matter how uncomfortable it is to live with other people. That is great, but it's still challenging with metta. Right? So, but it's still actually much, quote unquote, easier than to be alone, even if you like to be alone. This I have come to the understanding. So we have to really be humble ourselves, and understand that this is not just an individual practice, but this is something that requires community, requires sharing, requires, like an actual, a community of people, requires other people. So therefore, if you can join a meditation group in your town, in your city, or where not, if they don't have one, organize one. Start it with your friends or whomever, different people at your home. Like, it doesn't have to be anything complicated. If that is impossible, nobody's interested in practicing, well, then join a meditation group, maybe online. Like, for example, right now, since you're in Europe, you can also join in if you like. It's in Italian technically, but really, actually, what we're doing, we just show up in the morning and and we practice together. So at 7 a.m., you can join in. We'll say some things in Italian at the beginning and in Pali, so you can learn both Pali and Italian, and yeah, and take it from there. So then you have a group of people that also you feel like you're not alone in this path. Okay, and Sara says, who I believe is actually coming to visit us in a few weeks, and here in Italy. Hi, Venerables. What does enlightenment mean to you? How can it be better understood when the Buddha explains it as cessation without falling into nihilism? Do you want to? What does enlightenment mean to you, Venerable?
Well, I'm not enlightened.
Brief, because we have a little bit of a time constraint.
Okay. Are we going 30 minutes? I don't know.
It's supposed to end at 3, but we'll end it
when the questions are.
Yes.
Okay, great. So you all have some extra bonus points. Well, yeah, as I was saying, so I'm not enlightened. So until someone is, enlightened, then really they can't fully understand it. That's one of the things that the Buddha kind of, even in his time, there were people who thought they were enlightened, but they weren't, So even people who have been practicing for a long time can even deceive themselves, let alone people who aren't there yet. So what does it mean, though, in terms of, I guess, it sounds like what you're asking for based on the other part of the question is what happened. It almost sounds like you're asking what happens when an enlightened person passes away, which is kind of a little bit of a different question than what is enlightenment, right? Because, but there is a very kind of simple, the Buddha wasn't, how do I word this? So sometimes in modern times,
I think she's asking does enlightenment mean to you?
Yeah, but then she says, how can it be understood when the Buddha explains it as cessation of thought? So maybe it's two questions, sort of. I mean, what it means to me is a bit hard to answer. Sort of like, it's sort of like if someone is in university and you say, what does graduation mean to you? I suppose you could answer it as like, why you want to graduate or something. So maybe I don't connect so much to the question. Maybe
I'll answer.
Okay, yeah.
Well, to me, it's very clear. What enlightenment means to me is the cessation of suffering and the end of rebirth. So that's also why fundamentally I ordained, because, once I started getting into that predicament, I'm going to be reborn. This is not the end. Like, it's not after this lifetime that there is going to be, actually, I was a little bit nihilist, I will admit. So the idea prior to having the Buddhist worldview, my idea was that everything was going to be over after death. And that actually gave me a little bit of solace, because I wasn't quite the Greek type. I was a little bit more of a hate type, right? So I was like, oh, this is really dukkha, but there's going to be an end to this finally. So when I started practicing Buddhism and I understood the implications of rebirth, that really shocked me. And that sense that I'm going to be reborn with all sorts of difficulties, not only the difficulties that I have in this lifetime, but others. And on top of that, with the risk of not having the teachings of the Buddha to guide me out of them, really gave me a sense of urgency to put the robes on. And so this, we can tag along with your second question. That is, when you began your path, this obviously was so it's not first really putting all your to comfort. I really want to drink, I want to go out with my friends, but unfortunately, I have to be on these 5 precepts. So how about I go to 311? No, you should actually stay with the 5 precepts until you don't have any aspiration to go out with your friends. And then you train with the 8 precepts, and you stay with the 8 precepts as a layperson, once again, until you're not interested in hobbies and music anymore. It's not a sacrifice. It's just something that you're like, oh, wow, why did I spend all my time watching those movies? Why did I spend time listening to that stuff? Like, that's completely useless. Actually, I want to listen to chanting. That's the only thing that is even like remotely close to music that my ears want to listen to. And similarly, like with eating, like, oh, wow, actually, I don't want to eat in the evening. What a waste of time. As a matter of fact, actually, I want to eat once a day. That's like more than enough. If only I could also skip that one. You or so the free look like a so well-being.
Well, actually, you didn't. And very briefly, it's common for people to become a monk with a strong inclination to renunciation, but that doesn't mean it's fully developed, right? And you might have also periods where it's up and down, right? It's because the mind is, even someone who's, very far in the path, they might have periods where they have stronger desires and less. So it goes up and down, but briefly, you can definitely become a monk once you have kind of work on it.
And also be vulnerable with your sister. And what's on social media again, the tools. Same answer with I would say is scenario, but hopefully, sometimes we can't really bother, just to is speculation, and it's an open topic. Right, it's breaking up. I think we should call it again. For all your questions about